questions as we can. Thanks, Elena.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us and being so flexible as we work through some technical issues. I'm going to go ahead and jump right on in. I am Katie Wainick. I'm president of the Delray Citizens Association. We are very excited to have so many people joining us on this call tonight and appreciative of the time to do so. From the entire executive board, welcome. Before we begin, I do want to go over a couple housekeeping items. As with our town hall with Mayor Wilson, this session is being recorded. We hope to get it along with the transcript and a PDF of the questions submitted via the form on our website within 1 to 2 days. With so many registrants, you will notice that the chat feature has been largely disabled. You can chat directly to Elena, who is our Chief Information and Technology Officer. However, it's best if you have any questions to submit them via the form that we have out. As soon as we get some of these technical issues out of the way, we'll have her drop that link back into the chat. We are still accepting those via form, and we did have over 140 submitted early on. So we've gone through those questions, aggregated them, put them in groups based off of topic, and that's kind of the basis from where we'll be working tonight. We did notice as those were coming in that there are a number that are more appropriate to be answered by some other people. So we have asked some others to join us. So you'll also probably be hearing from Stephanie Landrum at AEDP, as well as from Mayor Wilson. Really thankful that they are both on the call and excited they could join us. I also want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our other area civic association presidents, board members, and HOA representatives for sharing this invitation and helping to source questions. We've heard from people from over, last count, about 11 or so neighborhoods, and just really excited to continue that discussion. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Senator Adam Ebbin and Delegate Bennett-Parker for quick introductions, and then I can jump right into questions.
Thank you, Katie. And thanks everyone from Delray Citizens Association for convening this call tonight. I really appreciate so many people being on the call and bearing with the technological difficulties, and appreciate all those who contacted my office and spoken with me or members of my team. We're here to talk about the proposal for Potomac Yard. And if I might, just in the way of introduction, because everyone wants to know our views, I want to acknowledge that it offers the potential for the city to be less reliant on residential property taxes. However, there are a number of quality of life concerns that residents have raised that Delegate Bennett-Parker and I share and seek more answers on. And those include mitigating transportation challenges, affordable housing, and labor conditions for construction and permanent workers. And we asked Stephanie Landrum, the president and CEO of the Alexandria Economic Development Partnership, to join us tonight because we wanted her to be able to respond to some of the questions that we might not be able to personally answer. And before I turn it over to our delegate, I just want to mention that two considerations as I evaluate the Potomac Yard proposal are: would it in fact help Alexandria lessen its reliance on the residential property tax, and how would it impact the quality of life of our community? So those are things that we're focusing on as I analyze the proposal. With that, I'm happy that Delegate Bennett-Parker is here and would like to, if it's appropriate, turn it over to her.
Thank you, Senator Ebbin. Thank you, Katie and Elena and the DRCA board for hosting and moderating this evening. And thank you to everyone who's joining us and participating and has made it to this side of the conversation. My name is Elizabeth Bennett-Parker. I'm the delegate representing most of Alexandria at this point. I'm also the elected official who lives the closest to the site. And so I very much understand and share many of the concerns that I've heard. I know that there are frustrations and questions about the proposal. I was not involved in the negotiations between the governor, the city, and Monumental, and so I have questions myself, and I'll be working hard to get answers. So I may not have answers to all of the questions we're getting tonight, but it's helpful and important for me and for us to hear what they are and to bring them back to Richmond with us. I've heard already a lot about this proposal from you. I know that I represent constituents who completely oppose this project. I represent constituents who support this proposal, and I represent constituents who aren't sure and want more information. Right now, as I said, I still have a lot of questions. I don't have a lot of information that I and that our community needs to understand to fully and properly evaluate this proposal. And so if the vote were held today, I would vote no. But I will continue to ask questions that I have and that our community has, and I will continue to evaluate the information that we receive. It is my job to fight for the residents of this community and fight for the taxpayers to make sure this is a net positive for Alexandria. I'm going to work to make sure that if this deal moves forward, it would positively benefit our community and its residents, and it's good for workers and local businesses.
Thank you both. Just because I know that we probably will be hearing from you both too, I'd love to have Mayor Wilson and Stephanie, if you both want to do a quick intro as well, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. I've already had the opportunity to answer a lot, but I'm happy to be a resource for the conversation. Thank you.
Same, Stephanie Landrum. I'm the president and CEO of the Alexandria Economic Development Partnership, and happy to answer questions as the senator and delegate defer to me.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And I know we do still have some people trickling on, so this has been already is being recorded, and we will get it up for any portion that you missed. So I'm going to jump into questions now. I think we'll try to run this more like a conversation. So I will ask, and Senator Ebbin and Delegate Bennett-Parker, feel free to jump in and respond as you feel led. I don't know that any of these are necessarily for one or the other, and some of them are probably a little more appropriate for the local level. So if that's the case, I'm going to try to kind of steer towards the ones more at the state, but feel free to let me know and we can respond and move as we need. So the first section we wanted to go through was on process. We would love to know, can you please walk us through your understanding of the process from today? What votes will happen at the state level, at the Alexandria level, and when can we expect those things to happen?
I'm happy to start at the state level with sort of the legislative process. So session starts on Wednesday at noon. It is scheduled for 9 weeks. We'll adjourn on March 9th if all goes according to plan. Bills are still being filed, but based on previous years, we'll probably have upwards of about 2,000 bills to consider during that time. We've heard that there will be a bill to create the Entertainment Authority. It could be introduced in the House and or the Senate. If that were to happen, it would get sent to a committee, probably appropriations. Crossover is an important date in the General Assembly. It is February 13th. That is the date by which a bill has to pass its originating chamber and pass to the other chamber. If it hasn't passed the first chamber, then it dies. If it were to pass, it goes to the other body and its relevant committee. If amendments are added or the bill passes with different language in the House than the Senate, then it would go to a conference committee to potentially get worked out the differences so that you would have one version. And I'll turn it over to Senator Ebbin to talk about the budget process.
Sure. Normally, large issues are decided through their own bills, an individual piece of legislation. However, the governor has included his proposal for the Sports and Entertainment Authority in the budget as well. So there are two avenues this could happen. I know that sometimes people talk about legislating through the budget as something they like to avoid, which I generally do. We're hoping to see an independent bill, so this bill will be fully evaluated on its own merits. I don't think the budget bill is the appropriate venue because it needs a full discussion and a full hearing. We want a hearing where Virginians will testify and legislators can cast their votes real openly. I think it's unlikely that this will happen through the budget. I think that we'll see a bill introduced in one or both bodies where it'll happen.
Okay, let's see, how is this being received so far in Richmond, and what is your sense of how this might play out?
If I could start, I think it's fair to say it's getting a mixed reaction. There have been some legislators who've announced their opposition, but there are others who are more supportive. I think most legislators have taken more of a wait and see posture. The legislators are going to evaluate it through their own lens. For me, the local lens is really, really important and foremost, but people want to see is it a net benefit to the state also. And there are others who are concerned, as we are, about transportation mitigation and look forward to more information becoming available on a transportation plan.
I don't know that I necessarily have a whole lot to add to what Senator Ebbin just said. I think that there are 140 members of the General Assembly, and everyone is ultimately responsible to their own constituents. And we've seen a lot of folks either take positions or take a wait and see approach, as he said, as we get more details and evaluate the proposal. I do want to step back because I think the previous question had to also deal with the local process. And I don't know that we addressed that, and perhaps Stephanie could.
At the local level, there will be 2 decision points, and the first will be whether and if to enter into the deal. And there isn't a deal if there is not a mechanism brought forward by the General Assembly. And so part of the community discussion that we're just starting, really, this is one of the first opportunities for engagement, formal engagement, is to talk about the benefits or differences and things that they'd like to see changed in the deal. And then the second piece, assuming that a deal is struck and legislation is adopted, would be the entitlement process to actually build the facilities involved. And the city process for that would happen over multiple months throughout the course of this entire calendar year. And so all of that will start to be kind of put onto a calendar as some of these first milestones as we start to move forward. But we're looking at, from the city perspective, to put forward a more formal calendar and engagement opportunity over the next couple of days.
Fantastic. Thank you all for that. How will you gather and use input from Alexandria citizens, especially those who live in neighborhoods closest to the proposed arena location, when determining whether or not to allow this to be built or to support it?
Elizabeth, do you want me to go first?
Doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, both of us are receiving input via email. We have in the Senate, they changed our email addresses starting on Wednesday. So my new email is going to be Senator Ebbin at senate.virginia.gov. That's Senator E like Edward, BB like boy, IN like Nancy at senate.virginia.gov. We've gotten a lot of emails from constituents who haven't been shy so far, and I hope they'll continue. I'm also going to be doing a constituent survey. I'll be mailing a postcard to about 15,000 homes, mostly in Alexandria City, before mid-January. And the constituent survey will include certainly at least one question about this proposal, and also have an open-ended question where people can express their views. We also have planned a Sunday, January 21st, town meeting in the afternoon at Alexandria City High School at 1 p.m. That's going to be with the entire 39th Senate District Legislative Delegation, which includes the 3 other Alexandria Delegate Bennett-Parker and her 2 colleagues from Alexandria, as well as one from Arlington, where people can come and pose questions. But we wanted to do this tonight in advance of any votes on this. It's important to us to hear what questions people have and have a transparent process.
I agree with everything Senator Ebbin has said. I think to the point about the January town hall, that is something we do every year with the delegation, and there are a lot of questions that come up during that on a lot of topics. As I referenced earlier, we'll be voting on several thousand bills this session. And so while I'm sure we will devote a portion of that meeting to discussion about the arena and any updates that there may have, there's also a lot of other topics we need to cover at that time, which is why we wanted to do this meeting as well. I think we're committed to listening to residents on this public input. This meeting is a critical component of that and the start of that process. Well, not really the start, as Senator Ebbin has said. We've both received a lot of emails and a lot of communication from constituents on this, and certainly taking that into consideration. Again, so I think I'm trying to say I'm reading all of my emails, but session being what it is with the pace, I may not be able to personally respond to those emails, but please know that I'm reading them, taking those questions, and informing my decision making as part of that.
Let's see. Okay. What measures are being considered to ensure that the promises and guarantees made by the governor or other state officials, people within the Potomac Yard Entertainment District leaders and others, will be legally enforceable? And is there a way to make those legally enforceable?
Well, there will be a bill that has the force of law with certain requirements. For example, if the bill called for tax incremental financing or something, that would be the mechanism it would be enforced by. I guess is there a specific there, or they just want to know what's going to hold things accountable?
Yeah, there was not. It seemed to be the context around it was just, what things that are being said. Is there any way to enforce it? Yeah, that
Well,
was the only context
I
given.
mean, if the bill called for a certain amount of dollars for transportation improvements or that sort of thing, that would have the force of law. So basically, whatever's in the bill is enforceable, and if something's not in a bill, it's harder to enforce.
Makes sense. All right, looking a little bit more into, we had a number of questions related to resident input, specifically if there was any way for Alexandria City residents to have the opportunity to express objection to the arena. Is there a way to do that through a formal vote? Is this something that could be put up for a citywide referendum? I know this question's come up on other topics before, and it's a little more complicated than that. So I would love, your thoughts on that and how that works within the Commonwealth.
Well, governing by referendum is not generally good leadership or makes the best policy. We are elected to make hard decisions, and this could in fact be one of the harder decisions that we make. I guess you're asking if there could be a referendum. I don't really. Is there?
We had a number of worded a variety of ways. I think there are a number of residents who wanted the question put forward. Is there any way this would ever be put to a referendum, and under what conditions would that happen?
Yeah.
Or would not happen?
Yeah, I think it's highly unusual for an economic development deal to be subjected to referendum. Virginia is generally not an initiative and referendum state, but I suppose it's possible. I mean, if anything was passed by the legislature, we could.
What opportunities do residents have to ensure that this, and this is in quotes, this is not my wording, this done deal is contingent upon satisfactory resolution of some of the concerns, or in the absence of a satisfactory resolution, stopping it entirely?
I would jump in and say that I don't think this is a done deal yet. It still has to go through General Assembly. It still has to go through City Council votes, and then there would be additional steps beyond that. Sorry, I've forgotten the rest of the question, sort of making sure that it's satisfactory. I think there's a lot of opportunity for public input, for engagement throughout that process as to what those satisfactory pieces would be. And that's sort of why we're doing this conversation, why we're engaging with the community and continuing to hear what those might be.
Yeah, and there are opportunities for us to include improvements in whatever legislation is improved. And if they're not satisfactory to us and other legislators, we have our vote and the possibility of not supporting it or defeating it if need be.
All right, thank you guys. I'm going to move on now to section B, which kind of focuses on the economics, how the economics works, what are some of the risks and what are the benefits. Really quick, as we move on, I can see our numbers are still ticking up. So thank you guys for joining us through some of the technical difficulties and links. This is being recorded and we will get it posted. So you will have the opportunity to go back and see everything that we've already talked about thus far. Moving ahead though, economics. Any expenditure of taxpayer money for a private entity, whether in a TIF or otherwise, should meet a high standard of delivering tangible benefits to local and regional residents, given competing demands for scarce resources. So far, we have seen only a summary of an economic impact study, so we received multiple questions on the economics of this deal. Can you break down this deal for us, ideally in the form of tax dollars in and tax dollars back out, the costs, the benefits, and the risks of this project?
I think that'd be a good question to ask Stephanie to start on, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I was going to see if I can share my screen. Success. Okay. Well, this is a complicated deal structure. It is also the first really of its kind. And I guess I'd start by saying the deal and the structure were put together by a team of staff who work for both the city and state, who looked at all of these sports deals and similar, although there's not a whole lot of similar entertainment and economic development projects like this around the country, to figure out how you structure a public-private partnership that uses net new tax revenue to pay for the public portion of the public-private partnership, and then also brings to bear private dollars. And so the way that this deal is structured is the total cost to build the entertainment district, which consists of an arena, headquarters, offices for Monumental Sports and the Monumental Sports Network Media Company, a parking deck, a performance venue, and the Wizards practice facility. So those are the assets that all together cost $2 billion, along with infrastructure required on site to support all of those uses. And found a way to structure the deal so that 53% of it would be funded through what's called a project revenue bond. So those are bonds that would be issued by the Sports and Entertainment Authority and would be backed by revenues generated on site, tax revenues, and other revenues paid to the Sports and Entertainment Authority. 21% would be a lease revenue bond. So that's another bond that would be issued by the Sports and Entertainment Authority, but would be paid back by lease payments from Monumental to use the facilities. And then the last piece, the 26%, is cash contribution. The majority of that, $400 million, is from Monumental Sports and Entertainment, a private company. And 5%, or $106 million, is from the city of Alexandria. And the city of Alexandria's cash contribution is to pay for a portion, half of the performance venue. The city would own that asset and to contribute to the parking deck. And so you see these numbers here, they're shown in multiple ways, but 53 plus 21, so that's 74% of the project is money that the Sports and Entertainment Authority is borrowing up front and is paying back with revenues or cash payments from the company. And then the remaining 26% is cash that is paid for upfront. So there are many other ways that we can sort of talk through this deal structure, but this is the basis of how we would be borrowing money as the Sports and Entertainment Authority, a governmental entity, would have access to tax-exempt bonds, which are the cheapest way to borrow money, and would be using revenues generated on site to pay back those bonds.
Right. Anybody want to add anything or jump in on that? I think the financing to this is probably one of the pieces, not surprisingly, that we received the most questions on. And I think also we'll probably continue to have a number of questions just because it is such a different structure, and it's really interesting to look at and just kind of work through. So I am going to continue on with some of the other questions that we have. And I know somewhere within what you just said, you've probably answered a few of these already, but just to kind of reiterate some of those points, I think I'm going to probably still go ahead with them because I know it's taken my brain a little bit to work around it. So, so there are a number of questions regarding the responsibilities and the state and city tax obligations for continued operation of the arena and concert venue should the projected revenue not be met. Will these be answered at the state level prior to the General Assembly voting on establishing the Sports and Entertainment Authority to issue those bonds? Or how will that be addressed, I guess, in Richmond? What discussions will be happening there?
Well, it's our job to ask the tough questions before we take a vote. And the questions from our constituents help inform the questions that we pose, whether it's to the governor's office or to the city or to other proponents of this deal. Elizabeth, did you want to add to that, or I don't know if there's more?
I agree with what you said. And I think sorry, I didn't catch all of the question, but I think I don't have anything to add, and we'll be making a list. I know Katie will put together all of the questions that we had, because I know we're not probably going to get to everything as well, but I think exactly, we share a lot of the questions that are being submitted and are taking those back to help inform our decision.
Yeah, we had one person submit a question that actually quoted the language establishing the authority, and I won't read all of that here for time, but it is it's within the document that you will get. The question related to that, my understanding of this section is that the proposed arena authority is entitled to almost all sales taxes produced by the project, leaving only property tax to flow to Alexandria. Also, subsection D is that should be a budget shortfall. And I think this kind of goes back to what we've already briefly mentioned. If there's a budget shortfall, Alexandria is expected to provide money for bond repayment from general revenue. Is that the intended use of the language? Is that the correct understanding of it? What would a budget shortfall look like from the city's perspective? How would it be handled?
If that's a city question, maybe we should ask the mayor if he'd like to comment on that.
Stephanie, you want to take a swing at it first, and then I'll close on it.
Sure. I will share a different slide. So the way that these bonds are structured, so I described that there are two bonds. One is backed by the lease payments. So there is no variability in the lease payments. That is a contract obligation with a set amount of lease that needs to be paid each year. And so there won't be any variability in the amount of money coming into the authority to pay that debt. So those are considered rated bonds and are on a risk scale are relatively low risk. The project revenue bonds that are backed by the taxes do have some variability because businesses will sell different numbers of tickets every year. The way that we have modeled and structured this is to provide 2 times coverage. So we are modeling that we will bring in 2 times the amount of debt coverage every year required. And so that gives us a cushion that our projections could be as much as 50% off, and still, or we could do 50% worse than we had planned and still be totally covered. What that means is that every year, every average year that we operate this facility, we, the authority, will pay our debt, the bond debt, and then we will have a balance left each year. And that balance will be divided between the city and the Commonwealth. And those monies will go directly to the city and the Commonwealth, to our quote unquote general funds. And the city will decide how to spend that money and what things to spend it on, and the Commonwealth will decide that. So that's all of that is written into the legislation and into the foundational documents. And so to answer that question, we are not pledging all of the revenues generated by this facility. In fact, we're only pledging half of those modeled. And we have built ourselves in that coverage to allow for, an off year throughout the course of the term. In an absolute worst case scenario, both the city and the Commonwealth are backstopping about 1/3 of the debt with what's called a contingent moral obligation. And so that would require the city and the state to split the shortfall if there was a shortfall. Part of the documentation that we're still working on, because this is an open and active negotiation, are all of the agreements between the city, the Commonwealth, the Sports and Entertainment Authority, and the company. And so there are some protections of sharing in shortfalls that happen over multiple years. And that's something that we're still negotiating with the team and with the company. There are protections for both the Commonwealth and the city in terms of non-relocation agreements. The company cannot relocate either one of the franchises for the entire term, so that we wouldn't find ourselves in a situation where there was no revenue being generated. And I think the last protection is that one of the facilities, the performing arts facility, is something that the city will own and be a joint venture partner in. And so we'll have some control mechanisms in the type of revenue and activity that's generated on site.
The term of the bonds that we're talking about, would the term be for that duration of the lease, or will the terms on the bonds be shorter so that eventually we would be picking up a higher percentage of those TIF payments? I think I'm saying it correctly, but the interest payments.
The term is right now, the way that we've modeled it, the term is for the 35 years of lease, but depending on the performance, those could be paid off. There's no penalty for prepayment. And
Okay.
so as you might, as a lot of people on this call might have been reading about other teams in this area, the Nationals are overperforming, and so or better performing those bonds, and so the city in DC is actually paying off some of those bonds at a quicker pace than anticipated. The mayor could probably talk a little bit about this, but you know, the city does. While these are not bonds that the city will be taking on, these will be bonds issued by the Sports and Entertainment Authority, which is a different legal entity. We're just pledging a portion of revenues that we'll collect, but the city has its own bonds for many, many things, and we have prepaid things that have performed better than we've expected, and so that's something that we could do with this scenario as well.
So we've seen numbers 35, we've also seen 40. My assumption, and I just want to clarify that here on the call, is that when we see a 40-year lease versus the 35, that 5 years is built in for construction. Or can you explain what, and that, again, my assumption, can you confirm that and or describe that for us?
That is correct. It's a 40-year term, 5 years of which will be the facility will be under construction. In order for a legal entity like the Sports and Entertainment Authority to issue bonds, you need to have a signed lease. You need to have a tenant who's going to be, moving into and operating the facility. And so the payments during that time period would not be paid for by the company. They would be, they're structured into the deal and are interest payments. Interest-only payments, I should say.
All right, this kind of jumps on top of that, and you might have talked a little bit to this already. You have a little bit. When are we going to be shown the sources and use of funds? For example, which taxes are going to be used to pay for what? If it's going to include TIF, is the TIF property tax? Will the new project generate any net new property tax to the city over the first 15 years? I think you've done pieces of it, so you can wrap it up together for us.
Sure. So you see here on this chart, phase one is the arena. Let me show, make sure we're all talking about the same thing here. So when we talk about this project, we talk about it in what we call arena phase, which is the area that is highlighted in red. That is the property and parcel that the Sports and Entertainment Authority will own and operate, and in which Monumental will be a tenant. Phase one is the blue shaded properties. Those will all be privately developed by developer JBG Smith and will be market rate hotel, residential, retail, generating property taxes and use taxes for the city and state, but also helping to support the tax-backed bonds. And then the green and blue are medium and long-term, or phase two and phase three. None of those revenues are pledged to support this project. And so all revenues generated off of medium and long-term will be paid to the city and Commonwealth. Not supporting the bonds to catalyze phase one and arena phase.
Okay. Let's see, I think we've covered the next one pretty well on our list. I'm going to jump down just a little bit. This was an interesting one. I don't know how feasible it is, so I wanted to throw it out there just to see kind of what the reaction would be and if it's even possible. Is there any provision in the bill that would ensure property tax relief for citizens of Alexandria? It's my understanding that the projected tax revenue to the city will almost increase the city budget by $500 million, which is almost half of the current budget. I would ask that you submit an amendment to the bill requiring a portion of those new revenues to be dedicated to property tax relief for the citizens of Alexandria.
Okay, so the question is, would we submit an amendment to the bill to require how the city spends its revenue generated by the project?
Yes.
If this bill goes forward and there's revenue to the city, I think we usually have the city council spend that money, and that would be my inclination, rather than being prescriptive, because we don't usually manage local finances in Richmond. But I think what's more important than being prescriptive is making sure that it's a good deal, that there would be money for the city to spend for the benefit of net money for the city to spend for the citizens.
I think to echo what has previously been said, I think the money would flow back to the state as well as back to the city, and it would be a policy decision for the city council when they have funds in their general fund as to how to spend that money.
And I do also know just from stormwater stuff, a lot of times you also get into Dillon rule with stuff like that too. So that would probably come into play, but that's probably another discussion. All right, so moving on to reports. I think one of the most common questions and concerns that we and within our board have seen from both members of the DRCA as well as the public has been the use of the in-plan model and putting together the impact analysis and how notorious it is for overestimating economic impacts with little consideration given to the negative impacts. What have you two heard about this? What are your feelings on this? Is kind of part one of the question. And then I've got some follow-up questions to related to that summary economic impact study. So
could you repeat the beginning of the question about the what model?
So the in-plan model is the model that was used to put together that economic impact study. And from what a lot of people that study these things have reached out and said is just how notorious it can be for overestimating impacts with little consideration given to some of those negative impacts. What have y'all heard? What have you learned? And what are your thoughts on that?
I'm still learning about the financing. There's a lot to learn. But this kind of project has the potential to not attract as much net users of city services as far as on the face of it, because if it was all residential, like 4-bedroom homes with children in them, where they're sending a lot of kids to school, that would be more costly to the city, perhaps, than people paying like a ticket tax and coming and patronizing restaurants and other things, then this appears on the face. But I still have a lot of analysis to do.
I know there have been a lot of concerns and questions about the economic modeling and the finances behind this and sort of the assumptions that were made. I'm similarly still learning, still evaluating. I haven't seen the study that was done for the state or beyond the summary that was done for the city. And so I think there's a lot of great questions out there that I'm still evaluating and learning as well.
Yeah, and Stephanie, I would love to give you the opportunity as well because, you have a great insight on this, so go for it.
Sure. So a couple of thoughts. The city has a long history of using economic impact studies as a piece of information that we evaluate when deciding whether to incentivize an economic development project. And so it's one piece of the puzzle. And these studies tell you a lot about economic impact, but they also in a more detailed manner tell us about fiscal impact. And the difference between economic impact and fiscal impact is that the fiscal impact nets out the cost to the city. And so as Senator Ebbin was just explaining, depending on what sort of use you have in a building, there are different costs that the city must take on. When there are human beings who live there, who send their children to schools and their residents to libraries, et cetera, there's an overall greater cost to a jurisdiction to provide those services than in a hotel where somebody comes and spends a night and then leaves. And so the fiscal impact of uses is different based on use. We looked really carefully at the fiscal impacts, so sort of the net bottom line when we make decisions about whether or not to pursue economic development projects. And so again, the study that we used and the vendor that we used is somebody who we have used in the past. The vendor we have used in the past for other projects that we have looked at in the city, but the in-plan model itself is industry accepted piece of information. We put in the real fiscal and tax rates at the city level, and we look at that information, and it's part of then what we're bringing forward as kind of the opportunity for the community to discuss. It's one piece of the puzzle.
And then one other question we got related to the model itself. It is how it appears to present only two scenarios. One as the as-is scenario, and the second scenario with the proposed development, which implies only with the latter will major additional development occur and associated additional economic impact occur. However, there is a middle scenario of more development, but without the arena and music performing arts venue. That does seem highly possible. And the question is, why was that not modeled or included within this summary?
So I'm resharing the screen, and I want you to look at the community, the attendees to look at number 2. Without this plan, the existing shopping center will remain for 20 years as is. And so if you look at this, the blue, the light blue, the dark blue, and the green would stay as is. And so we know how much revenue that generates. And frankly, that is where a very significant portion of the additional 9 million square feet that is envisioned in the small area plan is scheduled to take place. And so what we are comparing is the real world scenario of only really seeing this red area redevelop, either as an arena with a significant amount of tax revenue generated by all of the uses, or the alternative scenario, which was modeled for baseline, which is essentially residential buildings with ground floor retail. That is based on real information about existing commitments and lease obligations from the property owner. And so I understand how people think, like, looking at this property, you think that there should be an in-between, but the reality is that the market has changed in a post-pandemic world, and there isn't demand for office space and other commercial uses like hotels without a catalyst driver. And so that is a significant difference in the baseline scenario versus this scenario, is the ability to achieve new development and the ability to achieve it 20 years faster than the market would support.
And I think this touches on that too, but I know one question I've had people ask is the idea that the housing piece of it, right? Can you speak a little bit to even if the current, what's sort of slated to be there under current projections without the arena? I know it had a lot of housing, I think it was a couple apartment buildings, office, stuff like that. Describe what it would be like to try to switch that to more residential. Is that probably not even possible, but what would that look like?
I don't know that I 100% am going to understand the question, so hopefully I'm answering it correctly. The way that the small area plan is written is it allows for a mixture of uses throughout all of Land Bay F. But it requires a certain minimum amount of commercial activity, because we all, in sort of the history of our community, there's always been demand to build residential, but there's been a desire by our community to have mixed use developments, mixed use communities. And so there is a minimum amount of commercial that needs to be built per the small area plan. So there's not an opportunity just to convert it all to residential. But I think the bigger issue between sort of the baseline scenario and this arena is that the property owner has existing lease commitments to keep the shopping center as it exists today for a much longer term, for 19 to 20 more years. And so those commitments exist, and that demand exists today, and it makes economic and fiscal sense for the property owner. And so that is the use that we're comparing against, is the shopping center staying as is on the majority of Land Bay F and only having the parcel that is east of Potomac Avenue available for development.
There has also been a good amount of frustration about the amount of information, I think, that's been shared within that summary report. Understanding that there is a significant amount of proprietary data within the full scope of the report, is there a scenario where JPG could share more of the report without compromising that proprietary data?
So we're working on a follow-up. We've collected a lot of questions from the community directly and through lots of other venues, and we're working on a second piece of information for us to provide as much information as possible. Our goal is to provide anything that's not proprietary and that will help the community understand the benefits of this deal or the workings of this deal. And so we're hoping to have that additional information out this week. We're working with HRNA on that. I'd call it an addendum.
Awesome. Would it be feasible to have an independent firm conduct an analysis of the economic, environmental, crime, and other impacts? Are there some of these things in the works? And this question specifically, one of them specifically had the additional why have no sports economists been engaged with for their review and analysis?
So to the first question, the state is actually having a third party do an analysis of the third party HRNA economic study. It's part of what would need to be done in order for us to take to rating agencies and to the financial markets, the bonds. So we do have another entity looking through the economic impact analysis, and that is something that we will be able to share. That again, the state is doing that. As far as other economists, certainly open to talking to any of them and sharing information. This is a very unique deal. One of a kind. It is different than other sports deals that have been done. It is structured differently, and we're trying our best to explain the nuances of all of that. But happy to chat with any economists or have them talk with our teammates to better understand the nuances of this deal.
All right, so we are at an hour in of what we were supposed to at least be an hour in. So I want to do a quick time check with everybody. Panelists, how are y'all doing? Do y'all have a few more minutes left or good to keep going?
Yeah, I can.
All right, I appreciate that. And again, I know our numbers are still ticking up, so welcome. If you did not make the beginning of it because of our technical issues, this is being recorded and will be posted as soon as we can get it up on our website. So you haven't missed anything, you'll be able to see it. All right, so moving on down to some more economic questions. This first one has kind of a bit of an opener, so I'm going to read it slowly and then jump into the question. Especially in a multi-jurisdictional area like ours, it may be tricky to parse out exactly what economic impacts are happening in a project like this. For example, the report that we received talks about 30,000 permanent jobs, but don't most of those presumably already exist just across the river within a short commute of here? It's not clear how moving them 4 miles across the river would benefit Alexandrians. Can y'all speak to that and some of specifically those job numbers, how that kind of translates into a benefit for the city?
Well,
so
go ahead.
go ahead, Senator.
No, I was just going to say that the job report I haven't seen. Delegate Bennett-Parker and I have asked the governor to provide some more information so that we can get a better handle on that. But why don't we let Stephanie comment?
I'll just say the jobs that would be relocating are really closer to 650. 650 corporate jobs from Monumental Sports and Entertainment and the network. I think as the community is starting to understand, Monumental's proposal is actually to expand to Virginia. And so they would like to keep operating the Capital One Arena in downtown DC and move the Mystics there. That means that jobs running that facility would stay there. And so this would be a second arena facility. And so the jobs created in the arena here would be new. The balance of the 30,000 jobs that are spelled out in the economic impact are new jobs created as the rest of Potomac Yard gets built. And so those are jobs in hotels, in the office buildings that will also be built on site. Property managers running the new apartment buildings, people working at new retail and restaurants moving in. jobs at our new performance venue. And then all of the jobs then that are created to support a new district of this size and scale, people working in utilities, people working to maintain infrastructure. And so that is where the total 30,000 comes from. So it's not picking up 30,000 jobs from DC and moving them here. It's actually picking up a small percentage and then catalyzing the creation of thousands of new jobs in Virginia.
There does not seem to be any discussion. This actually probably fits a little bit better in the conversation we had a moment ago, but I want to go ahead and throw it out there because we did see it a few times. There does not seem to be any discussion about other potential uses on the site, such as another major education use, which would have a good effect with it would work well with the Virginia Tech building. What has been explored or looked into in terms, I think specifically with the education use? Has anything been explored? And maybe the best question here is why was an education purpose, why is this better than the education purpose or an additional school?
I think that's a local planning question, right? So maybe Stephanie or Justin want to talk about that land use, or?
So it's two-pronged. I'll happily let the mayor talk about what this does actually to generate an opportunity for education at the local level. I think the first part of the question was more of a like, why did we go after an arena versus like an education use to build on the innovation campus? And I'll just speak to that. We have been actively promoting this site as a marquee site for economic development for years. And we did bring Virginia Tech, and they are building an innovation campus. And we have been working to bring other corporations who want to build on science and technology and create those sorts of jobs. Monumental is a corporate headquarters who hires science and technology graduate students. And so their relocation of their corporation to be adjacent to the Virginia Tech campus, Virginia Tech was one of the reasons that this site is attractive to them, in addition to its site, to the availability of land, but also its proximity and location on top of Metro. We will continue. Part of what is exciting about this is because this project, if it moves forward, it then unlocks the ability for us to build new office space. And so we will continue to talk to other education and corporate tenants and hopefully really create this district. And it's a reason we're calling this a sports entertainment innovation district. And then I'll let the mayor talk to what this does for the local school, and I'll share the screen again with the visual.
Yeah, so in the North Potomac Yard Plan, which is where this is included in, there are a variety of community amenities that are required to be provided by the developer as development proceeds, and one of those is a school site. And so, as depicted on the screen that you're looking at right now, as this development is catalyzed and happens, ultimately, then that site is required to be turned over to the city as a school site. In addition to the school site, there are also other pieces of the plan that will become unlocked as the development proceeds, and so that includes open space that is part of that in plan. That includes infrastructure, basic infrastructure. That is part of that plan, and road network and grid and things like that all come out as part of that plan. In addition, there is also our normal requirements around affordable housing, both inclusionary units that we require or encourage as part of those plans, as well as financial contributions, and then just the kind of the market rate housing and the impacts that has. Obviously, we went through a pretty significant conversation around how we encourage market rate housing and the impacts that has on affordability. So I think there are a lot of different community amenities that were built into the North Potomac Yard Plan that has been in place for a long time. And so I think to the specific question around kind of did we explore other alternatives? I think Stephanie's right. There has been a significant density improved on this area for a long time. And then obviously the landowner is always working with different folks to determine what uses are viable as we go forward.
Okay, thank you guys for that. So the others in this section, I think we've largely touched upon already. And so for time, I do want to go ahead and move on, because one of the areas that we have gotten the most comments on, the most questions about, is traffic and transit. So I definitely want to hit on those while we're here. Excuse me. So this one also has a kind of large intro, forgive me, but I'm going to try to get through it. In initial reports about the proposal, state officials were quoted saying that the 150 to 200 million in transportation funds were redirected existing transportation funds, and that it was, quote, sort of an asterisk in the deal. Has more clarity emerged from our state legislatures about the transportation funding, either amounts or sources that would be redirected from? We'll stop there. I think that's a big enough one in itself, and I can get to the second part in a moment.
Sure. The governor talked to the money committees that Delegate Bennett-Parker and myself sit on the week before Christmas, and talked about a world-class transportation plan. And I followed up and asked his Secretary of Finance when we're going to see that plan and so forth. I understand that the state is engaged in a transportation study with a pretty large consulting firm called Kimley-Horn, and that study is due this month, this January, presumably before votes would occur on the plan. So I have not seen the level of detail that I would seek, but I think Stephanie's going to comment. She's got on the screen some of the timeline on that. Stephanie, did you want to explain that?
Yes, I was just providing it for you as a backdrop. And this slide essentially says exactly what the senator just said, that the state has engaged Kimley-Horn to take what was a preliminary on-site analysis done as we were evaluating the possibility of this project, and turning it into the next phase of a study to identify actual projects, and for us to go from a conceptual amount of money needed to make transportation and transit improvements to an actual number. And so that study is underway. In terms of the dollar amounts, there are $110 million included in the project funding, 25 of which is for transportation on site. Our numbers thus far, again, done in the preliminary, which are going to be now really worked on in this Kimley-Horn study, we flagged around $200 million worth of potential projects that would be needed to help move people through this district. One of the takeaways that we want to focus on is that this site was always planned for a significant amount of people coming to it. We talk about 8 to 9 million square feet of space, a lot of it being office. That's what the vision was. That was 20,000 people coming to work every day in an office building and leaving from work. So people moving in and out of this district. What we're now talking about is a similar amount of people coming and going, but at a different time, different peak times. And so that is going to require a different set of transportation and transit investments. I'll show this this next slide here. These are the 4 categories that Kimley-Horn and the project team are looking at. How do we manage traffic during games and events, which again is different than people coming to and from an office or coming to and from their house twice a day? How do we protect the neighborhoods immediately adjacent and where people will be traveling through? How do we improve the existing Route 1 multimodal improvements that are already in place with bus rapid transit? And how do we increase access to transit? And so this is a preliminary list of the sorts of improvements that Kimley-Horn and our state partners in transportation, as well as the city partners, are looking at. And this, I know, speaking on behalf of kind of the city and our city partners, this is where engagement from the community is going to be extremely beneficial, is to understand which and what types of these improvements would be most beneficial to help manage moving people through Potomac Yard. And so you see on this list here, everything from kind of big scale regional improvements on 395 and 495 to hyper local improvements to our local neighborhoods in protecting, cut through traffic, parking, things like that. And then some bigger ideas like adding a water taxi connectivity, perhaps on 4 Mile Run. thinking through what how to best connect VRE and Amtrak to our metro system. So these are the sorts of improvements that are being looked at through Kimley-Horn and the state.
And if I could add, transportation is probably the #1 quality of life concern that I've heard about from the residents who've written to me, and it'll be really key to me in making my final decision. The bottom line is, we have to ask ourselves, with this project, can traffic be managed or even improved, or would it become unacceptable? So this study is really important, and I'll be looking at it closely before I make my final determinations.
I would echo what Senator Ebbin just said. And then this slide is really hard to read. So Stephanie, is this already posted or will it be posted? Because I can't read it.
Absolutely. We have shared it with Delray Citizens Association. We will be putting it up on the monumentalalx.com website. And this is now being used by all of the project partners. And so you will start to see many of these slides in other briefings as community engagement continues.
That was one of my next questions as well, is this would be shareable. So we did, there was a number of questions that we also received regarding some of the transportation needs that were discussed when Amazon came, specifically in Arlington, and how Route 1 was envisioned to be more of, I guess, a pedestrian boulevard. How does this impact that? And how are we working? And I'm going to actually combine two questions. How are we working with the other jurisdictions around us, both, Arlington as well as Fairfax County? And we had one question specifically asked about capacity at the metro stations at the end of the line. Huntington was the one that they used, but I know Springfield would be another one where people would probably want to drive and park their cars. So what are we doing? How is that being thought through, and how are we working with our neighbors on that?
Stephanie, is that something that you can comment on, or?
So the Secretary of Transportation, his secretariat includes transportation, roads, transit, et cetera, and is the lead from the state's perspective on managing the Kimley-Horn study, but also engaging more of a regional discussion. Alexandria is not an island and has a long history of working collaboratively with Arlington and Fairfax County on things like rapid transit and other transit that traverses all of our jurisdictions. We have preliminarily had conversations with Arlington and Amazon about how to make sure that the improvements that were envisioned to calm Route 1 as part of the HQ2 investment package might be tweaked or changed to accommodate a project like this. And so the secretary and his team are going to be leading kind of this regional discussion that will be based on the Kimley-Horn study. But I mean, the very short answer is that all parties are motivated to work together. Our neighboring communities see this as an interesting economic opportunity that will have positive impacts beyond the Alexandria borders, from both economic but also employment and business activity, and want to, but we're all kind of motivated to make sure that we, if we were to do this project, that we're doing it in a way that our transportation system supports throughout the region.
And if I could jump in here specifically on the transit question, because I think historically we've actually had a pretty good collaboration with Arlington County as it relates to transit. The bus rapid transit system is a great example. We have not had that same historic collaboration with our friends in Fairfax County, and quite honestly, that's been more on us than it is on Fairfax County. Alexandria was long resistant to having north-south connectivity of transit to Fairfax County. And that has been something that our friends in Fairfax County have been very, very interested in, and have been frustrated, quite honestly, with Alexandria's resistance to that. I think the council has had some conversations over the last couple of years, particularly as part of a regional bus rapid transit study, about kind of changing our position on that issue, and really being more open to connectivity, and potentially having the bus rapid transit system that right now terminates at Braddock Road potentially continue into Fairfax County and connect with some significant bus rapid transit investments that Fairfax is making on the Route 1 corridor. And I think while those were not envisioned as part of this project, they create a real potential to drive those investments forward, because I think those are going to be really the future of how we get around this region, regardless of whether this happens or not.
Awesome. Stephanie, I want to say thanks for calling out the water taxi. I threw in a question just of, that was really exciting to see. I mean, some of us joke, gondola 2.0, but at the same time, it's really awesome to see different versions of transportation being looked at. I do want to jump ahead, being mindful of time. So I'm going to jump to some of our environmental impact questions. Many residents have raised concerns about the lack of an environmental impact study. Number one, how and in what ways is the National Park Service being spoken with? And then the other question is, what lessons learned from the construction of the Potomac Yard Metro will be used to prevent the potential ballooning of the cost of this project, as well as any potential delays that might happen as a result?
I guess I'll answer on behalf of, I'll answer both those questions. And as far as National Park Service, they are one of multiple stakeholders who own adjacent properties and will be involved in the process in appropriate ways. The good news about this site is that we are very, this isn't the first development to happen in Potomac Yard. We're very proud that there are already 3 corporate headquarters located in Potomac Yard: APTA, NIB, and IDA. So those projects are literally adjacent to this property. We also happen to have the Virginia Tech Innovation Campus. So we know how to develop this site. We know what process needs to be followed and what partners need to be engaged. And so National Park Service is in good company with Metro, with our Airports Authority, and with neighbors. And so we will be following, a similar path forward to make sure that those people are included as needed and as they would like to be. And on the second piece, because of the way that this project is being structured, it's going to be owned and developed by the Sports and Entertainment Authority. And honestly, one of the major responsibilities of that authority will be to manage the project budget and construction. And so there is a finite amount of money that will be borrowed. The budget will be set from the beginning, and the contracts and the construction will be managed accordingly.
And if I can just jump in here, the North Potomac Yard plan also includes some of our most heightened requirements around environmental sustainability, and so development in the yard would be expected to meet those requirements as we go forward. It's also important to note, right, that this is that the defining feature of North Potomac Yard today is asphalt, and so I think as we redevelop the yard, we have an opportunity to change that and create much more sustainable uses as we go forward.
I'm going to jump to another topic now. Airbnbs, and also touching on some housing and equitable housing concerns. This one has a bit of a statement. I support the stadium concept, but before it is adopted, the state or city must give communities ways to limit Airbnb activity. If the stadium comes to pass, Lynn Haven will be swamped with even more Airbnbs than it has already. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on Airbnbs. Do you support working within the confines of the Dillon Rule to curb Airbnb activity in the city, or adopting such laws at the state level?
Well, I think we've adopted laws that give the city some regulatory ability with Airbnbs. And if the city would like more, we can consider that. But Mr. Mayor, you have some Airbnb regulations in the city. Is that authority sufficient for the city if they wanted to further regulate it?
So the authority you guys gave us was around registration. The city was one of the first jurisdictions in Virginia to elect that authority once you did give it to us, and we appreciate that. Beyond that, there is kind of a smattering of regulation that's occurring around the Commonwealth right now, and some of it's being tested in courts. And So it is not entirely clear right now what authority we do have at the local level. But I think we've seen jurisdictions, including Fairfax County next door, adopt ordinances that have been sustained in the courts. And so I can speak just for one member. I know that we have gotten requests from the community around further regulation of Airbnb, particularly from Lynn Haven. Lynn Haven seems to be a neighborhood that has seen really a proliferation of these uses in our community, and certainly some complaints around both quality of life impacts as well as what that does to our housing stock. It is not yet something that the city is actively considering. However, we have had the city attorney provide us with some analysis regarding what authority she believes that we have. And I would not be surprised to see the council work to advance some increased regulation on Airbnbs in the future. I think we do have to balance the regulation with kind of the overall impacts, and certainly property owners, particularly property owners who share their homes, in some cases rely on the income to remain in our neighborhood, and so we want to balance that. But I think particularly for the those who are absentee landlords who are managing stocks of Airbnbs, those can have some real negative effects on housing stock. And so I would certainly be supportive of looking at some increased regulation in that area.
Yeah, I think the balance the mayor's talking about is important. I chair the committee that deals with if there were to be statewide regulation of Airbnb, it would probably go through the General Laws Committee unless it went to local government for some reason. But I'd be supportive of giving the city more authority if it needs it or if it requests it.
I want to jump in here and say I'm absolutely supportive of giving the city and other localities more regulatory authority when it comes to Airbnbs. We actually had a bill last year that would have preempted some of the cities and other localities' authority when it came to Airbnb regulations, specifically some of what has been enacted around ADUs, and I was horribly opposed to that. I don't know if it plans to come back this year, but I generally do not support preemption of local regulations and would want to give localities more flexibility. I know Richmond has adopted additional Airbnb regulations. I don't know if that's subject to court. I haven't issues. I haven't followed that recently, but absolutely supportive of giving localities more authority in this area.
And along the same lines with housing, many have concerns regarding the impact on property values and property taxes, as well as rent. Groups are raising serious concern about the impacts of rent on our underserved communities. See the Tenant and Workers Union letter. And the potential for this to exacerbate housing inequality in Alexandria. The arena is also replacing 2 planned apartment buildings, and the complex in general reduces the amount of space to provide additional housing. We did touch on that earlier, I know. Are there any assurances or what can be done at the state level to work to prevent apartment complexes from taking advantage of a proposed stadium and arbitrarily hike up the rent? Is there anything that can be done? Housing prices in general was one that we've seen pop up a few times. So just any of your thoughts on those or other questions pertaining to it?
Yeah, I think we're going to see legislation again from Senator Jennifer Boysko of Herndon to support rent stabilization authority for local governments or rent control. That's a controversial topic and a big change. Virginia does not have rent control currently, but it's something that is within the purview of the state to consider. Rent control is not always as simple as we'd like it to be in just making prices stable without any impacts. But I think it's going to be discussed again this session. I think it would be a big change for Virginia to have rent control adopted for localities. I was thinking, I support making landlords give significant notice for significant rent increases. More than just 30 days notice before they raise your rent a large amount. But sometimes when there is development, rent does go up, and that's I think a possibility. My office met with Tenants and Workers United, and Delegate Bennett-Parker and I met with Tenants and Workers United late last year to talk specifically about rentals. And I have some legislation dealing with protecting tenants, but I think Elizabeth has been a leader in that area as well.
I have previously supported the legislation that Senator Ebbin referred to about giving localities authority for rent control, and I would continue to do so. And I, share the community concerns about affordable housing in our community. And I think there's a role for the state to play here in addressing and providing additional funding to maintain affordable housing for Alexandria and specifically for the surrounding impacted communities, including Chirrillagua.
One thing I just want to kind of address from one of the first things you said is that like this arena is replacing a planned two residential. This arena is catalyzing 8 million square feet of mixed use development, honestly, the majority of which will likely be residential. And so it's actually creating and bringing online more units much faster than we will see if the shopping center stays as is. And while more supply certainly helps with it's one of multiple factors, right? That helps with controlling rent and cost prices. The other two things that are true of this project is that the city has an existing policy where 1 cent of the meals tax that's generated is dedicated to affordable housing. And as you might imagine, there's a significant amount of meals that will be served and purchased in this entertainment district. And we did not, any of the existing dedicated taxes at the city level and state level were protected and not pledged to this project. And so we have modeled that somewhere between $50 and $60 million just from that 1 cent of meals tax will be generated by this project. And then the last piece is that as development happens, as the private side of development happens, phase 1 and beyond, the city also has existing proffer conditions. I always need to say that correctly. Proffer conditions that will generate on-site affordable units as well as potential contributions to affordable housing as residential development takes place. So it's not, I don't want people to think that it's an arena or no residential. The arena is actually catalyzing residential, which will help with affordability.
Thank you guys for those. All right, I'm going to go ahead and round out our last category, which is on public safety. Excuse me. Is there a requirement for a public safety plan? If so, who will pay for this plan? When will it be done? And how much of the results should the public expect to see?
I don't know that.
Yes.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just going to say there will be a public services agreement. I think Senator and Delegate mentioned that towards the beginning of this call that there are a series of agreements that will be entered into once and if a sports and entertainment authority is generated or created by the General Assembly. But a public services agreement is one of those. It will be a detailed plan that outlines the level of service to be provided in the district and will explain who pays for what. It is certainly something of utmost importance to the community, and it's something that we, when I talked earlier about fiscal costs, it's something that we have been very conscious of, that we needed to make sure that we were able to provide the level of service for a use like this, but also that the project itself can pay for some of that, that increased level of service needed.
Senator, did you want to add anything or?
No, just that's something that we got to evaluate also is, it's what services are required is something that we would expect the locality to take the lead on, but we'll be looking at, at what they come up with. Yeah.
And how does everyone envision that working with the police and first responder shortage that we currently have? I think you just answered a lot of the questions we had on cost. We had a number of those. How will it be paid for? Who will finance it and how? But how do we just manage capacity of just, the number of people we have now? How does that work?
So I'll take a crack at it and let the mayor chime in. But for facilities of this size and scale, it's not the expectation that all of a sudden Alexandria Police Department would have to triple in size. There's a regional design to the service plans where you take advantage of public service professionals who are serving in local, federal, and other agencies to create kind of redundancy and service across across this region. And so I think it's natural for us to think, oh my goodness, like something this large, we would have to, add so many police officers and EMS professionals. It's really a regional compact. And that's part of how these service plans are negotiated and structured, is to take full advantage of the entire regional resources and not have it unduly sit on the jurisdiction in which the facility is located.
No, I think Stephanie handled that quite well. In addition to it being regionally, we would never be in a place where this would negatively impact our ability to provide services to Alexandria residents. Obviously we have, I think, as mentioned by the question, we have had staffing challenges on the police side for the last several years. Obviously, a national staffing issue with police. We are getting back to our authorized staffing numbers, though, with pretty significant academy classes these last couple of years, and we will soon be back at those authorized numbers very shortly.
Okay, so I had one come through. I am trying to kind of scan through some of the ones we've added, but I do want to go ahead and wrap up here because we have definitely gone far beyond the time we expected. Thank you guys for all hanging out and hanging on. One of the quality of life concerns that I've seen echoed a little bit is noise. Obviously, this is going to be an indoor facility. It's not going to be a football stadium that's open air. It's not a baseball stadium. How is there a plan in place, or how do we measure noise? How is that going to work with quality of life with nearby residents? Is that something that is kind of a secondary concern? How are y'all looking at that, and we're potentially addressing that?
I don't know if that's a local question or not. My primary concerns are transportation and financing, but I think anytime you have construction or a new use that brings a lot of people, there can be noise. I would hope that things would be constructed to contain the noise in that district, but I don't know if there's a local noise component at all. Justin or Stephanie?
Yeah, and obviously the city has a local noise ordinance, and I do think it's important if Stephanie can reshare the slides that show kind of the depiction of the development. I think it's important to realize how small and how compact the actual arena use is in the grand scheme of Potomac Yard, and how far back it is compared to everything else that's going on in Potomac Yard. So, and then I think to look at the context, right? As you look at this picture right here, you see an airport. You see rail tracks where some of the most busy freight rail tracks in the entire nation are right there, as well as a passenger rail company I'm aware of as well. And then a metro rail as well. So there's already a significant amount of noise that's operating in that corridor. But this use, as far as the impact on residential, is going to be shielded by a heck of a lot of development and a lot of other things that are going to shield any noise that's generated from this site. But I think, as pointed out, this is also all indoors, so it's an indoor use.
And then to kind of wrap things up, I would love to hear thoughts on what portions of this proposal ease your mind versus what portions of this proposal are still kind of big question marks. As you're hearing from residents, what are the things that you would like to hear, if there's something you'd like to hear most? What are sort of those red lines for you guys, right? Just share your thoughts on kind of looking at this from now until whenever those votes occur, what it is that'll kind of make your personal vote and thoughts support move the needle.
I can start. So I think there's a lot of things, obviously a lot of things have come up on this call, and we'll continue to hear probably new things in the questions that have been submitted during this call and new emails that will come in. I think, there's a lot of attention and focus being paid on this, and we've gotten some very unique niche issues. And then obviously the big ones like transportation and traffic and quality of life that we've discussed. I think state funding for Metro is a big question for me. Obviously, we know that Metro is not the only way that people will get to this site if it were to happen, but it is on the Potomac Yard Metro site. This project doesn't work without the Metro, and so wanting to see a commitment from the state for how that will be funded, including the improvements that are necessary to make to the Potomac Yard Metro. I think those details that we're talking about coming out from the transportation study and sort of what the details are for that, the governor's proposed world-class transportation plan and how the effects on Route 1 and local traffic can be mitigated if they can be, appropriate funding from the state for those. I think data around traffic and transportation in terms of, sort of the volumes on the surrounding roads now, as well as how people are currently getting to the site, sort of both the method they're using to get there, where they're coming from. I know a lot of people have raised that site is on, coming back to Metro, that's on 5 lines, Potomac Yard's only on 2, sort of where are the people coming and how did they get there? We've talked a lot about housing, so additional funding for affordable housing and a lot of the concerns that have been addressed there for existing residents. And then I think more answers about the underlying economic analysis and assumptions, some of which Stephanie has addressed. I think there's still more to come, as she mentioned, on that in terms of the third-party independent review that the state is doing. Looking forward to seeing that. And then ultimately just continuing to engage with the community and hear the questions and concerns and suggestions they have for this project, if it were to move forward.
I think that was a pretty thorough answer. And I want to echo it and just say quality of life is a big concern for me, particularly transportation and affordable housing. And that, as Delegate Bennett-Parker stated, Metro is not only continuing to function the way it does with Virginia's contributing towards that funding, that's like a prerequisite for us to consider the deal. It's not a trade-off, like if the governor puts in the money for Metro, that I'm suddenly 1,000%. It's what we need to have this deal considered further. And I'll be looking for that and some other things as well.
Fantastic. Mayor Wilson, do you want to take a stab on that one while you're here?
No, I think Senator Ebbin and Delegate Bennett-Parker did an able job on that one. So.
Fantastic. Are there any last question here? Are there any final points? I know one thing that I saw in the question that I did want to address, because I do know that it is not true, was the question of how could this be voted on by city council without public input? Obviously that has not happened at this point. This is part of public input. There will be additional opportunities for it as well. Are there any other kind of misconceptions or just things that you're seeing, that you're hearing, that we'd like to just go ahead and clarify now as we wrap up this call, or any other final points that you'd like to make before we end the evening?
In the chat, there were 3 questions that I think that people should have gotten by context, but I just want to be clear on. One person asked what the Sports and Entertainment Authority was and does it already exist? And I think we've been clear that the Sports and Entertainment Authority would be established by the Commonwealth of Virginia with the city if the General Assembly votes for it, and that would be the financing mechanism for this proposal. The other is, someone asked about the concert venue. Just to be clear, as you saw in the picture that Stephanie had shared, there is proposed a arena for the sports teams, as well as across the plaza, a concert venue of about 3,000 seats is what they're proposing. And the last thing that wasn't really answered that was in the chat, I'm sure there are others, is someone asked what level school was being considered. Maybe the mayor could tell us.
Yeah, that's ultimately going to be a decision for the school board. They have not made that decision. There was some discussion when the school board was considering the high school project, the configuration of high school, about potentially including that site in the constellation of high school buildings. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but
So the answer is undetermined. It could be
undetermined
or something else.
Undetermined at this point is the answer to that question.
And the site for that would be, what is the yellow box right along Route 1, correct?
Correct.
Within the,
Correct.
okay.
Correct.
Okay. One clarification question, and Stephanie, this one might be for you. That concert venue, I know some of the renderings had some seats outside. Could you explain what that performing arts center is? Just really quickly, just so people have a little bit more clarity on it. We talk a lot about an arena. We don't talk nearly as much about that performing arts center.
Sure. So, I mean, the The basic answer is that everything that we have shown so far, and maybe this is a really great way for me to end, is to say that all of this is illustrative. None of it has been definitively designed. Every building and will go through a city review process for community input should we move forward. The concept, though, is that this would be a mostly interior performance venue, but that would have a small outdoor stage that faces the arena to create sort of a community plaza. So you could imagine where you could have an after work concert or a pre-game kind of concert or facility. But you also could imagine if and when there would be a city school somewhat proximate, you could have a school performance that could be available for the community. Part of the reason that the city was so interested in helping bring this part of the entertainment district to life is that we are missing a facility of this size. 4,000 to 8,000, being able to handle 4,000 to 8,000 people. So think about Alexandria City High School graduation actually being able to happen in Alexandria City. Think about Alexandria City High School prom being able to happen in a facility like this and not having to go to a large hotel outside of the city. There are lots of community events and flexible, things like that a venue of this size and flexibility would be able to accommodate, but the majority of it really is inside. But again, all of this would be designed as, and if we move forward.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for being on the call. Thank you so much to our panelists for fielding these questions. Thank you to everyone for working through our issues. Again, we did have only about half as many people that registered that were able to join. So as you talk with everyone, let them know we will be posting the recording. I will be making sure that all of the area Civic Association presidents get that link as well, so they'll be able to distribute it. And just thank you to everyone who made tonight possible. Really cannot thank everyone enough. So we'll be getting all these documents ready and posted, hopefully, like I said, in 1 to 2 days. And I hope everyone has a great evening, and we look forward to continuing more of these discussions down the road.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having
guys.
us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.